same time. So do you want to do it, Casey?
Yeah, that's totally fine. And then I'll share the
Okay.
link, and then I'll download it and share the link and everything.
Okay, great. Are we recording now? I think I turned it off by mistake.
I've got it recording now as well.
Great. It doesn't show that it's recording. All right, as long as you've got it, that's great. All right, welcome everybody to ED 615 at CSU Monterey Bay. We've got our wonderful panel of people here to share. There's the recording. Great, here we are, ED 615. We just love technology when it all works. So we're glad you're all here. I'm glad to see Blanca, Aisha, and Glenn here. Tyler will join us later on. I'll let them introduce themselves. We could go around, and I'll just start with Blanca and then Aisha and then Glenn, just sharing a little bit about your story, your memories from elementary history classrooms, and your experience growing up in the US. So please share a little bit about what you're doing now and the history that brought you here. So Blanca, I'll turn it over to you first.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Blanca Baltazar. My pronouns are she, her, ella. Aisha and Glenn, so great to see you again. A little bit about me. So I will start by sharing what my current job is. So I am the dean at Cabrillo College for the academic career counseling, career, and educational support services. This is new as of August 1st. I was previously associate superintendent in the Salinas Union High School District, have been a K-12 educator for 26 years, took the leap of faith over to higher ed, and actually I'm really enjoying it and loving it. But I did start off as a high school teacher, history and mathematics teacher. And then my passion, teaching AVID, took me into the counseling realm. I was a high school counselor, and then from there just did all the administrative jobs that you could think of. But I think what I want to share with you that's really important is that, throughout my schooling, I did have very key influential people, teachers specifically, that really, I believe, changed the trajectory for me. So I am an immigrant to this country. I came when I was 3 years old. And obviously my first language was not English, it was Spanish. And my parents were teenage parents. And so I grew up in Watsonville, that's where we came. I was born in Michoacan, in Quiroga, Michoacan, which is the capital of carnitas, if any of you have ever been to Mexico, to Michoacan. And I would say that in fourth grade, while I did not see myself in history books or in any of the curriculum for that matter, I will say that in fourth grade, I had my first teacher that looked like me. And her name was Lucy Valdez. And it was her first year as a teacher. And I think she was the one that I felt for the first time really saw me, valued me, and really wanted to get to know me. Previous to her, kinder, first, second, and third grade, I went to 3 different schools. My dad worked in the fields and my mom worked in the canneries. And so we moved around a lot within Watsonville. So I went to different elementary schools. And nobody had ever really stopped to ask me why I was always talking in class. I was known as Blanca the Chatterbox, or they would tell my mom I was a little social butterfly. But Ms. Valdez actually took the time to get to know me and to ask why was it that I was talking and not paying attention. And she realized that I was bored, right? And that I would finish my work. And so she really gave me the wings to start helping others in the class and going to kinder classes and reading. And so I know you're all aspiring educators. And so I think later I'll have an opportunity to share with you, but what I can say right now is how important it is to build those relationships with your students and to really see them as individuals and not as a whole class. And so fast forward, I think the other significant moment in school for me was in middle school. My dad was facing deportation, and we were all facing deportation, for a matter of fact. I did not know I was undocumented. However, the judge that we had was very kind. And because my brother was born here and our lives were here, and I had not been to Mexico since I came, he advocated for us to remain in the country and for us to continue to seek residency. And so took many years, but finally as a sophomore in high school, I became a resident of this country, and later when I was a university student, became a US citizen. And that was through the amnesty program in the late 80s. And so I was the first in my family to graduate from high school. I was the first in my family probably to go beyond 8th grade. And so graduating from high school was a really big deal and a celebration. And I really wasn't going to go to college. I was working and I didn't know about college. Nobody talked to me about college. It wasn't on my radar until a friend of mine that I was working with at the video store asked me where I was going to be going to the university, and I told him I wasn't. And so he talked to me about Cabrillo College. Talk about full circle. The college that I am now a dean at, I was a student at almost 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago. And so I ended up going to a community college and transferring to Sac State. And so then happened another significant event in my life. There were many, but these are the three I think most important. My dad passed away when I was in Sacramento. I went to Sac State, and that was really difficult being the oldest of four. My sister was 9, my brother was 12, my other brother was 18, and I had just turned 22. And I had to kind of hurry up and get my degree and come back home. And so I could help my mom, who was only 40 years old. She was a widow at 40. Remember, I told you my parents were teenage parents, and my dad was 41. And so that was really difficult. But I think through my personal experiences, having gone through a lot, another major important thing that I forgot to say is my mom was a Watsonville County worker that went on strike in 1985 for 18 months. And I hope you share that history in your school, because that's local history. And that was really significant because I think it was my first introduction to social justice and advocacy. And although I was young, I didn't know why we were picketing and why we were on strike and why I was marching with Jesse Jackson and Cesar Chavez, who came to Watsonville to support them. Later, I learned the why, and I really attribute those moments in my life as kind of really shaping who I have become, right? Which is someone who advocates for others and really leads with a student-centered, equity-driven mindset and like my North Star that I don't deviate from. But all of that is because of my personal and my professional experiences. And I think I've said enough. I want to let my partners here, my colegas, share their story, but there's so much to share, and try and minimize it into 10 minutes is hard.
Blanca, before you finish, could you talk a little bit more about that deportation court case and your role in it? What you did?
Sure. So it was really strange because I remember it vividly. We had to go to San Francisco, and I was the interpreter for my parents. There was nobody interpreting for them. And when I was asked to go kind of sit in, I don't remember the little chair where they ask you questions and you have to raise your hand and sort of tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. The judge really was very curious about me, and I think wanted to know whether or not I had any connection to Mexico, and I was not able to answer any of his questions because I had not been back. And he asked me what I wanted to do when I grew up. He wanted to know about my friends. He wanted to know like my dreams and the impact it would have if I were to return to Mexico. And really, when the judge gave his ruling, he said it was because of me and my brother. And knowing that he believed that the life that I had here was that I would, I would have a better future here than I would in Mexico. And I was a very good student. We had to take my grades. And I think that my interview or my responses really moved the judge, I think, more than my parents and what they had to say.
For sure. I just want to make sure you included that. Thanks. Aisha, on to you.
I don't know. It's so hard to go after Blanca. You know that you're one of my heroes, and I've heard your story so many times. And again, like, it still just makes my eyes a little watery. You're such an awesome hero. Congratulations on being over at Cabrillo. That's so awesome that college students get to benefit from that from you.
Thank you.
So my name's Aisha. My eyes will stop watering in a second. I have a current job over at the Volunteer Center of Santa Cruz County, which I absolutely love. I'm in their mental health division. I run 2 programs, which are really awesome, and a ton of other programs that Blanca and I will have to connect on. I help people find work who would like a little bit of extra support, and I run a really awesome health program that helps people eat healthy and provides health coaches. I got into working in mental health in a very circuitous way. I started with community development after I finally went to college. I was a non-traditional college student, so I had a little more time to think about what I wanted to do in my life. And it's interesting because my experience in elementary school and people seeing my leadership skills there, and then again when I was in college, kind of got me into the work I do today. But so as you can see, I wear a hijab. Either that or I'm just very cold. Both is actually true right now. I've got an extra jacket on because my house has been chilly ever since it was flooded at the beginning of this year. So I'm Muslim, and I've been Muslim for about 20 years. I did not grow up in a Muslim family. My mother's family live up in Idaho, and they are conservative Christians. I went to a private school up there when I was young and finally moved down to where my 2 dads live in Santa Cruz. When I was really young, my dad came out. He moved down to Santa Cruz, where he had a place in the beautiful park that I live in now, Paradise Park. And this is where he met my other dad, who I sometimes call my bonus dad. He's the very decorative one. So it's a really great bonus to have. He often buys me very fashionable scarves and gave me a love of decorating that my neighbors see various times of year. When I was young, I was really kind of an outsider because of because I had a gay dad and lived in Idaho. It's much more common now, which is awesome to see. And I'm glad to see in places that they're making space for families that are diverse, including LGBTQ families or people in foster care or people being raised by their grandparents or aunts. I think not seeing myself reflected in families and in conversations and about families in school made a huge impact on me. And because I went to a very conservative place that had a certain take on my father's lifestyle, I chose to be really critical since I was young about a lot of things that I heard. And that was an interesting experience for me as a young person. They taught creationism at the school that I went to. And even though the internet wasn't around then, you had to like go to the library to get more information. I went and read up on evolution and was like, I don't know, this makes sense. And I would get in trouble for speaking out in class about things that I didn't agree with, including how slavery was presented and the plight of the Native Americans. Those are things that I see getting better in schools, but honestly, those are the things that I carry with me now. I actually carry a lot of sort of resentment towards the lies that were taught to me when I was young about history. And I'm glad that as an older person, I got to judge that and look at it and read books that taught me about the real people's history of the United States. But when it comes to elementary school, some of the most outstanding things were things that, like, teachers that took the time to recognize my leadership even as a young person, or encourage me to take an active role and be interviewed on the local news and things like that. Teachers really did make a huge difference in my life. And then later in high school, when I was having trouble, it was teachers who made sure that I was still getting good grades and graduating. And I really appreciated that. So thank you to all you teachers out there and future teachers. I know that you'll touch a lot of people's lives. Mostly that is what I have to say, and I'd love to pass it on to Glenn unless you have any other questions, Rob.
That's great. Thanks. On to Glenn.
Phew. Had to unmute myself. So Rob completely underestimated the time that we've known each other. Maybe
I'll have to take Casey's math class to learn how to do my math. Yeah.
I think so. It's closer to 40 years than 30 years because we are old. But Rob and I knew each other in college. So we've known each other for a long time and have recently reconnected. So that's awesome. And it's great to see Blanca and Aisha again. And can't wait to see Tyler. I love seeing you guys every few months. You're my buddies that I've never met in person. So anyhow, my story, I'm a 66-year-old retired person married to a career educator. So I have a nice spot in my heart for educators and what you go through and what you will go through in the future. As my wife taught for 38 years. She taught special education, she taught kindergarten, she taught second grade, she taught third grade. So I've been through all those classes with her and experienced all of that. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from UC Riverside and a master's degree in business and MBA from UCLA. I retired in 2016 after a career in financial planning and analysis, 26 years in the corporate world, and finishing my last 6 years of my career at UCLA in higher education, doing finance work for them. I currently live in Cerritos, California. So I'm in Southern California as opposed to where all of you are. It's a little bit warmer here. I was out playing golf today. It was beautiful. I'm a third generation American of Japanese descent. So in the Japanese world, that would be Sansei. Issei being the first generation that came here. So my grandparents, the Nisei, my parents, and then Sansei, which is my generation. My maternal and paternal grandparents both emigrated from Japan. My Nisei parents were born in Los Angeles. And so here's the part that was never included in history classes that I took back in the Stone Ages. And that was during World War II, under presidential order, executive order 9066 by FDR. My parents and grandparents were forced to leave Los Angeles and were sent to prison camps, which have since euphemistically been called internment camps or relocation centers. But they were sent to these camps solely because of their ancestry. My father's family was sent to Jerome, Arkansas. My mother's family was sent to Heart Mountain, Wyoming. So imagine, if you would, moving from Los Angeles climate to Arkansas or Wyoming in the middle of winter. It was quite challenging for them. My parents and their siblings were all American citizens by birth. My father was 19, my mother was 17 at the time they were sent off to the camps. 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry were actually sent to the camps. Over 60% of them were US citizens. My grandparents were not citizens at the time because there were laws restricting them from becoming citizens or owning property in the United States. And later, they became naturalized citizens once the laws were changed. My mother graduated from high school while at Heart Mountain in the internment camp. She ended up being the valedictorian of her high school and gave the valedictorian speech, which my cousin was actually able to find that speech as she spoke from the camp. My father served in the U.S. Army during World War II at the same time that his family was in the internment camps. He was an officer in the Military Intelligence Service and served under General MacArthur. In the post-war era, he served as an interpreter for the war crimes trials that were held in Tokyo, Japan. Rob asked me to share a little bit about my experience that I had when visiting the internment camps where my mother and her family were sent during World War II. A few years ago, on a trip across the United States, my wife and younger son, as we were moving him to Maryland, we visited the site of Heart Mountain, where my mother's family was sent to live behind barbed wires. There's now a nice visitor center on site. If you're ever in the middle of nowhere of Wyoming and want to go visit, it's a great center. But as I entered the visitor center, a docent asked me if anyone in my family had actually lived at Heart Mountain, and I told her that my mother's family was there. As I toured the center, I found a large picture of the Heart Mountain Photography Club, and kneeling in the front row was my grandfather. It touched me deeply seeing him there. In fact, I still have some pictures of there's my grandfather. Rob just showed the picture of my grandfather kneeling in the front row. While I was there, I explained to my son, so my grandfather, can you point to my grandfather, the one wearing the beret in the second row? Yeah. So as I was walking through there with my son, I explained to him, son, this is why you have big ears. This is my grandfather who had very large ears. So my son inherited genetically his large ears. But anyhow, I was seeing my grandfather there was pretty surprising to me because I was actually looking for pictures of my mother. And then I walked around and saw that picture that's like a 3-foot by 5-foot picture with my grandfather kneeling in the front. And a woman who was touring the museum, because I kind of gasped and I pointed, I said, that's my grandfather. I said it out loud. She was standing next to me and she was surprised to actually know that I actually knew. She asked me, did you actually know your grandfather? I go, yeah, he used to come over every week to my house. So I guess it feels like such a long time ago, but I think I put it into a frame of reference for her that made her realize this really wasn't that long ago. It was only a generation, 2 generations ago. So anyhow, the docent at the visitor center was able to pull records of my mother's family when they arrived at the camp, which barrack they lived in, which they shared with other families, their government assigned numbers instead of their names, when they departed, when they arrived and when they departed and where they departed to, because when you were in these camps, you were allowed to relocate off of the West Coast if you had sponsors somewhere off of the West Coast. They were concerned about spies, which in hindsight, they never found anyone in the community who ever did any espionage for the Japanese. Anyhow, the docent also gave me an aerial picture of the area and with a map that showed overlaid where the barracks would have been. So my sister and I, we actually drove out to that site and stood on the site where my mother's family would have been, and imagined what it would have been like for a young girl, 17 years old, from Los Angeles in the middle of January in Wyoming in this desolate, deserted area. Tremendously moving experience for me, because my family was treated as criminals. They were put behind barbed wires. They had armed guards watching over them, losing their personal freedom for no other reason than the way they looked and where their ancestors were from. This is a very important part of my family history, and I believe an important part of American history. But at least when I was going through school, this was not part of the curriculum. I understand that today there is a little bit more discussion about what happened to the people of Japanese descent during World War II. But I know that when I was in school, either I wasn't paying attention or it wasn't included in the curriculum at the time. So I think it's important for us to include all of these pieces of history so that young people can learn the history of our country. That's about all that I have for today. Rob, did you have any
Great.
questions or anything you wanted me to add?
Nope, I think you covered all of it. I'm gonna, so Mirna, I'm gonna spotlight you, and if you would turn on your screen, you get to ask the first question. Let me,
Hi everyone, I'm Mirna Duarte Reyes. My pronouns is she, her, ella. I am straight. I am Latinx American. I came to the United States when I was 2 years old. I am a student. I am a mom of 3 elementary age girls, and I am also a wife. One of the questions that I saw constantly on the document that we have is there any tips you can give us teachers when teaching about race and or sexual orientation?
I can start. I think the first thing I would say is the best way to teach about race, at least, is starting with your own student stories and having an assignment for your students to be able to share. It could be, interviewing their grandparent, interviewing their parents, and having, prompts that would solicit information that you feel is important, that are, based on in the standards that you have, because then it becomes a little bit easier. And also, I think the other big thing I would say is building community within your classroom is so critical and very important, and making yourself vulnerable to share your own story with your students, because when they see that and they can connect with the adult, their teacher, they're going to be more likely to be more open and feel a sense of safety. And also be very transparent with the parents about what your assignment is and what you're doing and the reason. And you will have parents who might push back, but I would say that always align whatever you're doing with the standards. And especially when it comes to gender identity or having different families, or some great elementary age appropriate books where you can introduce these topics, and that you are aligning them with the standards. And so, but tip number one, build community, be vulnerable, because when you do that, then you're going to get much more richer discussions and participation from your students, and also from the parents or the caregivers. And I'll pause there.
Len or Aisha, you want to add on to that?
I always like Blanca's advice for folks. Like, she obviously has a lot of experience since she was running the Pajaro Valley School Districts, and a very important role. She has really great advice on that. And I think I see so much political charge around right now, specifically when it comes to talking about gender and sexuality, that I didn't see 5 to 7 years ago. Among the many things I've done in my life, I also was an EMT. I worked at an LGBTQ plus center. I really loved that job, and it got me into being an activist. I do identify among the letters of LGBTQ plus, but I also do the work that I do there and volunteer with them because I care about making faith spaces open and affirming. I think that's really important. I don't know how you can do that as much as a teacher. So I would 100% take Blanca's advice about it. And I think sometimes just by including, folks who have LGBTQ plus parents, or people who have another faith, including that it's going to be Ramadan coming up pretty soon for your students. That goes a long way to making someone feel included in a space. When it comes to LGBTQ plus folks, though, it seems like I hear a lot more in the news now than I did, 7 years ago when I was working in a space that did a lot of education around it. So I think it's also a good time to be supportive by being who you are in the classroom for LGBTQ plus students. You know, I'm sure that the standards and the rules at schools are not going to allow bullying, things like that. And as a teacher, how you react to that can make a huge difference for students who are being bullied. And LGBTQ plus students and Muslim students, in fact, in California report huge rates of bullying. Like, I think it's more than 40% of California Muslim students report being bullied at school. So, you know, just by existing as a person who obviously is open and welcoming and says things like Happy Ramadan, or doesn't allow someone to say something bad to someone else in your presence, goes a long way to making someone feel comfortable there.
All right, we'll go on to the next question asker. Taylor, let me spotlight you and you can ask your question or add on to any questions after that. Go for it.
Hello, I'm Taylor. I'm joining you from the cockpit of the Millennium Falcon. I'm a straight, white, cis man. I am the enemy. And I am doing everything I can to use my privilege to diminish the kind of harm that's been done historically. My question for the panel is, what What recommendations do you have about how history should be taught in elementary classrooms such that all cultures, genders, and sexual orientations are visible and included? So it's kind of the same, continuation of the same idea. But I think maybe Aisha would have some really good insight into that.
That's awful. And I love the Millennium Falcon spin. I come from a long line of people who are both fans of Star Wars and Star Trek. Thanks, Mom. Literally, my siblings' kids, 2 of them, okay, all 3 of them really, if you stretch it, are named after characters in Star Trek or Star Wars. They live in both. Also, good inclusion for people who are Star Wars nerds. Would have made a great difference for me as a young person. It was really popular when I was young. And the thing that I loved now when I look at movies is when we see diverse people represented in them, right? Like newer Star Wars, just by the presence of someone who's openly gay or trans or anything makes a huge difference. And I think that kind of takes us back to that idea that what we present in history matters. I hear all the time people say stuff like, why do we have to care about all this trans stuff now, like trans people, and it's all just new? And it's like, oh, I'm sorry, you can go back to 4500 BC and find Akkadian texts that mention people of a like tertiary gender. That is actually not new. Apparently there was one of the early Caesars near 222 who felt better as a woman. Like, just by including those great facts and teaching kids about a diverse group of explorers in the world and not just Columbus, big thumbs down, or Magellan or somebody, right? I think that makes a huge difference. Like, if you just mention among the world's rich people that there was once a Muslim ruler in Africa, Mansa Musa, who was perhaps the most rich person in the world, even if that's just a side note, you've just given so many shout outs there to like a diverse moment in that teaching. All right, pass the baton.
I think I've said in previous classes that tagging along with what Blanca said about having kids do presentations about their own family history, I think when you do that, that I know that growing up, my family history was not represented in history books. So to me, that led me to believe, well, my family history must not be that important. And that when you create classroom time, which I know from my wife, classroom time is really, really strapped for time. You've got to fit so much into such a short period of time. When you give a child the chance to share their family history, you're showing them that their family history is important enough to take up that precious classroom time. So I think that could go a long way to helping kids feel recognized, seen, that their family history is recognized as important enough to take up classroom time. because as teachers, I know you guys have to really budget your time well. But when a child has time to talk about their family history, one, gives them an opportunity to do public speaking, which I think is very, very important at any school age. And then it also shows that their family history is important.
I'm just going to add one thing. I would say that also remember that it's not only for like the history section of history period that you teach history, right? So I was thinking about math and how I always like to bring up the Mayan and Aztec civilization and how what sophisticated mathematicians they are. And so I used to tell my students, like, your blood, like, you are a mathematician. It is, you know, your ancestors developed like this amazing system, right? And so it's really important that everybody owns history and that there's ways to integrate it in all subject areas. When you're talking about science, when you're talking about math, when you're doing physical education, I mean, there's just so many ways. And so I think that that's really important to remember. And so I guess my one thing with that is your collaboration with your colleagues. The more you collaborate with each other within a grade level and do some vertical articulation, and you're all really have the same values, the more the numbers make a difference, right? So if you start getting pushback, it's like all of you are doing it. It's like you're not the only person, right? And that you have that support from your school administration, your district leaders. So there's more power in numbers if you're all kind of working together and collaborating to make sure that all of your students feel valued and included.
Thank you for that fantastic response, all three of you. Since I have my face up here, I'm going to ask one more question. So there are some really, really hard issues, and a lot of the questions that my peers submitted asked about specifically introducing certain concepts, whether they be about gender identity or race or culture, or really, really horrible things like genocide, internment, white supremacy, and racism. How can those kind of ideas be introduced to particularly younger students K through 3?
And then let me piggyback on that question and just say the other part of that is, if people are afraid to teach those topics, what can they do to begin teaching those and moving those thoughts forward? So those are the two parts to that question.
So I'll say, if you have any teachers who are ever uncomfortable talking about internment camps during World War II, just give me a holler. I can show up and talk to you about it. I'd be happy to do that. I'm retired. I got all the time in the world, except for Tuesdays and Thursdays I play golf, but I'd be happy to do that. And I have actually had people come to my church, which is historically Japanese American church and has a lot of the history. I've had a number of different congregations actually come to my church, and I tell my family stories so they can understand that. But I would, never forget about retirees, retired educators, or just retired anyone who has some experience. They're more than willing. Many are very interested in trying to help out teachers, because I know it's, as the husband of an educator, I know how difficult the job it is. But I'd be happy to come to wherever and talk about the internment camps if someone's not comfortable doing that.
I'm like wholly unqualified to even hold an opinion on this, to be honest. That last part of the question feels so heavy. I would 100% just call a friend, Blanca, on this one. I don't envy teachers having to talk about that. I don't envy parents having to talk about it, but at least when they're your kids, you kind of get to frame the narrative. Yeah, Blanca.
I'm sure Blanca's got other comments, but I want to just point out that you shared two important strategies. One is to talk to other people, talk to colleagues, find people who might be Japanese and talk to them. There's people in all of our communities that represent all these ethnicities, and you've got kids in your classes whose parents, you just have to ask them to be part of it. So those are two great strategies, but I'll let Blanca share the next part.
Well, I was actually going to say that I think the first thing, because the second part of the question, Rob, I think is really important, is I think as teachers, we have to feel comfortable with the content. Like we have to feel like we're able to, lead an activity or do a direct instruction on a topic. So first is like getting the professional development that you need to feel comfortable and collaborating, with each other. So I think that's first. And then there are many activities that I haven't seen third grade, but I'm sure that there are activities that are specifically about inclusivity. So an activity, for example, to talk about intersectionality, and I would have to think about how I would modify this for elementary school students, but there's an activity where you put all as many identities as you want. So you could, it could be about shapes and figure, like your body shape, right? And it could be about your ethnicity. It could be about your race. It could be about your gender identity. There's so many different identities. So you can start with some that are maybe not as controversial as others, just to start understanding what intersectionality means. And then when you have them all around your classroom, what you do is you start by saying, you tell the students, okay, students, I'm going to read a statement, and then you're going to walk to the identity that most resonates with you in that moment, right? And so, for example, the identity that I most identify with here at school, like what do I identify most at school? And it could be anything, right? Whatever is up there. And then they talk about it. They talk about why they said that, why that identity. You can ask them the identity that I identify most when I'm at home with my parents, with my family. And a lot of times there's age. Age is one of the identities, and age always, they tend to go to age because they say they don't have a voice and they're young, because I've done this with middle school students. And so there's multiple questions multiple statements that you say, and then you have them walk. And every time you do that, they talk about it in a partner, and then you share a whole group. And then you talk about, after you do that 8 times, then you talk about why is it important to look at all the different identities that all of us have. And that just by looking at oneself, like you can't tell everything about me just by looking at how short I am, or the color of my skin, or if I have an accent or not, right? There's a lot more to me. And so it's introducing them to intersectionality. But anyway, there are many, many, many. I would recommend doing some professional development with the National Equity Project. I did professional development with them for over 12 years, learned a ton about equity and also liberatory systems and anti-racist instruction and strategies. So the best way to do that is really to go to professional development specifically on that. Try it with yourselves, like as the adults, practice before you do it with the students, because then you can figure out what things might go wrong. And then always invite, people that's what they do for a living. Invite the experts in the classroom.
Great. All right, Mia, you're up next. Can I make you a spotlight? Yeah, I'll add you in there.
Myself on there.
There you are. Great. You're up.
Everyone, thank you. Good afternoon / early evening. Thanks for all of your guys' story sharing and your advice, and just the empathy that you show towards each other. It brightens my soul. My personal question, we're each from different sections, so I have a group of questions from my section that kind of have the same topic line. Mine specifically was, once you question one thing, you question everything. What was your one thing or your first thing?
There was really like two first things for me. And it was that made me question everything. And that was when my dad came out and I lived around a bunch of people who just had like really strong anti-LGBTQ leanings. And they said a lot of harsh things about my dad, you know, being a terrible person or going to hell or just being horrible. And then the next year I went on an international trip and we ended up staying in Bethlehem in the West Bank. And I had grown up around a place that was really politically very biased towards Israel all my life, like pro-Israel all my life. And I'd never even been presented with another opinion. And I lived in stayed in this West Bank at a church and a school. And there was a huge guard tower with people with really large guns and automatic weapons. And I grew up in Idaho, so I've been around a lot of guns. I don't love them personally right now in my life, but I'm not terribly uncomfortable at seeing weapons. And I was still like a little intimidated by these giant weapons. And so I made an assumption that those were the bad Palestinians, the scary bad people that I had been presented with all my life. And then they were like, no, that's actually the Israeli army. And it really just made me look at what I'd been told about that political situation a whole lot. And because it was at a time where I was willing to, because of my dad, look at things and really start questioning them, just like learning about evolution through the library. I was no longer willing to like make my just judge what one or a bunch of people told me was a situation. Sorry for bringing up the Israel-Palestine thing. Like, it's kind of a sorry, not sorry, but like super sorry because it's so charged and I don't want to like make anyone feel uncomfortable, friends.
The question does apply to all three panelists, so if you're all comfortable sharing.
Can you kind of repeat the question, Mia?
Yeah. So once you question one thing, you question everything. So I was inviting you guys to share either your one thing or at least your first thing.
Or what caused you to start questioning everything? Yeah. What was the event or interaction?
So I'll share that my son, my younger son, has really helped me. He provides me with a reading list of things to read about, and questioning really helped me to question my understanding and belief in history, and how what I was taught, I simply accepted everything that was taught because that's what the teachers were telling me. And then as I began doing some more reading, even the World War II experience for my parents, there's a certain way that history is spun about, oh, well, that was necessary to protect the safety of other people. And I go, okay, I can kind of understand how the hysteria of the time would say that. And they also said that this was to protect my parents and grandparents because of hysteria out there in the world. But it really got me questioning everything about history and how history's been represented. I've lived. I'm older than all of you except for Rob, but anyhow. So just my perception of the world has changed significantly from the time I was in high school to the time I was in college to the time I got married to the time I had kids. And my son, who is a graduate of UC Santa Barbara and was a psychology and is now a master's in social work, I would make statements and my son would say, really, Dad, is that how you see that? And then he would provide a different perspective. He goes, Dad, I'd really like for you to read this book by Brittany Cooper. And the pandemic was good for that. It helped me really do a lot of reading and really made me have a whole different perspective on the history of the United States and history of the world. So I would credit my son for really opening my mind. Took a lot of years for that to happen. but my son has stimulated me to question things. And now I really do. Your question is right. Once you start to question one thing, you can start to question everything. And when my wife and I were back in Washington, D.C. and went to the both African American History Museum and the Native American History Museum, those two museums really opened my eyes and really got me questioning what was I told in the past. Watching as a kid growing up, watching all the cowboys and Indians movies that I watched, and then going through that museum and seeing and reading about how Native Americans, indigenous people of the United States were treated and continue to be treated. It really changed my perspective. So,
hey, Glenn, before you finish, could you talk a little bit about how your parents talked about that history or any history they shared with you?
So, and you'll find this is very common amongst my generation of Japanese Americans, that our parents and grandparents did not talk about their camp experience whatsoever. That they are very private about that. Maybe they were ashamed, I don't know. Maybe it just hurt so much that they didn't want to open up those wounds and talk about it. What we heard as children growing up is we would meet people of my parents' friends and go, oh yeah, we knew them from camp. And that sounds like a really positive experience, but it wasn't summer camp. When you talk to a Japanese American and some of my parents' generation say, oh, I knew them from camp, they're talking about the World War II internment camps, not summer camp. So it's, yeah, so my parents really didn't talk about it. And I've learned more about it by reading since they passed away and going to visit all these different internment camp sites than they were ever able to share. And as I read the books about people's experience in those camps, I can resonate with some of the stories, some of those few stories that my parents talked about. But through reading, I can get a feel for what it was like to be my parents and my grandparents. Does that get at it, Rob?
Thanks. Yeah, I just thought that was important for people to understand that aspect as well. As we get older, we get better for sure. Blanca, you want to answer Mia's question?
Sure. I think mine was similar to Glenn. Taking my first Chicano history class at Cabrillo and wondering, like, why wasn't I taught this before? Like, why wasn't this representative? So I think that was the first. And I think as I'll share professionally, I think when I started to see how different students were treated differently, it really made me wonder why and whose norms, like whose social norms do we have to adhere to that defines what good behavior or bad behavior is. And that just took me to so many different places. And as a result, I really wanted to be in a position where of power and authority to be able to change policy, to be able to change the way that we do things in school to benefit one group of students over everybody else. And that has been my entire career. And so it's still something that I always question, and I always ask the why. Why does it have to be that way? Why can't we think of other ways?
Great. So this is kind of open question time. So anybody can jump in here, ask a follow-up question or type something in the chat, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to just stop talking here a minute and see what other questions or perhaps thoughts that Blanca or Glenn or Aisha comes up with.
Rob, do you mind if I share my screen? I want to share a storyboard that I put together for something else, but I want to show a picture. Are you okay with that?
Oh, great. Go for it. Yeah, you should be able to share.
Okay. So this is a storyboard that I did for another presentation. But what I wanted to share with you is that picture of me right here. This is like when I was 2, right before I came. And then like fast forward over here, that was when I got my doctorate degree in 2017. So that was a really, obviously very proud moment. But, and I also just wanted to share that I have 2 boys, and one of the most important things for me has been to really instill in them the privilege that they have, so that they use it in a very positive way, because they're growing up so different than the way I did. And also to be social activists in their classrooms and in their community.
But that was perfect, Blanca, because we all just did me posters in our classes. So they just did all those presentations the last couple of weeks. Other questions, thoughts? There were lots of questions in the opening document, haven't been asked yet.
I just want to add that about the last question. One of my classes in Cabrillo that I took about history, my last class of history, the teacher said that always in history classes, you need to ask the why. So that was a moment, open eyes to me, like, that's true. If you don't ask the why, you never be able to understand history or teach it, or be able to be open to new some other stuff about history. So I was like thinking about that, and it's true. When you make the students think about the why, they start like getting engaged in the history and asking more questions and asking the why, and look for more answers. Yeah, I just want to comment about that.
Thanks, Daniela. That's awesome. Taylor, you want to ask that question out loud so everybody hears it?
Sure. So I read this in the document. I don't know who to attribute it to, but I'm going to say, what do we do if administration is not supportive of the topics chosen to teach in the classroom? What can we do if what we are discussing is too heavy for some students, but not for others?
So I would say I'd go back to, I think that's why it's so important to get to know your students and be able to create kind of that safe classroom environment and have a protocol in place. So you could have an inside-outside circle where if you're in the inside, like you're ready to have those conversations, right? And you're on the outside, you're an observer, you're taking notes, you're going to kind of summarize. So you still have a role to play, but you could do inside outside, or you could also, if it's a reading, you could have a strategy where, different people are summarizing and you're getting to some of those ideas so that it's not so deep yet, and introducing the topics, slowly. But having those relationships with your students, I think, will go a long way. So that students can tap out. So I always give your students an opportunity to tap out if they're not comfortable. Sometimes as an adult, if I'm in a space and I'm learning, I might not be ready because I'm still processing. So I like to just kind of tap out and give myself that space. In terms of administration, that's a difficult one because you don't want to be left out on your own, having to defend something. And that's why that's so important for you to have that collaborative team with your grade level. And perhaps I would suggest having that conversation with administration, with a group of you, to talk about the importance. And of course, everything has to be standards aligned, right? So always go back to that, and that this is a topic that is to be discussed, and try and work away with the administrator that would, where they would feel that that it's okay. Now, what I would say is if if the school is not in alignment with your values and who you are as a teacher and what you think is the right thing to do in your classroom, then you may want to rethink whether or not that is the place for you to continue teaching. And that is a difficult decision, but you don't want to constantly feel emotionally tired and drained and have that like battle fatigue, because you need to be in a place where you're going to get to be you and you're going to get to do what you believe and is aligned with your values.
Mia, it looks like you might have another question.
I do. Let me lower my hand because I always forget to do that afterwards. I do have a question that was in the chat. I just wanted to show my appreciation for sharing your stories again, because my sister explained it to me one time, just to get on my soapbox and affirm what you guys are saying about getting to know your students, because the what people are saying about, you know, sensitivity to topics in your children is that saying something is like opening up an open wound for someone. It's like it's a trauma, and if you were to compare it to a trauma surgeon, you're not gonna know what's bleeding, what's coming from where, if you're not assessing the area and digging into the medical history, if you will, of your students' emotional needs. So I remember my sister explained that to me socially once. So that's how I think about it with my kids, as if they're these precious people that emotional and physical harm can feel the exact same. And the question, thanks for letting me be on my soapbox and affirm you guys. The question that's in here was about tools and resources that the three of you may know about for us to refer to.
I love that question. There's so many, I love that you were bringing up sort of the work-life balance, Blanca, because I work in mental health, and I love the agency I work for because they care about our work-life balance. And I see teachers working really hard out there. And I hope that all of you head into this competitive market where we don't have enough teachers and like get that job at a place that cares about your work-life balance, or where you have great coworkers that nourish your soul and make that work worth it. There's a lot of really great resources for students. Like, it's nice to remember that if students need help, hopefully your school has mental health support, or if you're teaching in Santa Cruz County or Monterey County, there's various supports for families with children with mental health diagnosis. Often if we catch things early, you know, you see kids more than their parents do. So hopefully you know how to recognize depression and certain signs of like suicidal ideation. Hopefully you get more. If you ever want more information about that, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to reach out to somebody in your county. We now have like non-emergency numbers that you can call to just get information about what resources you could pass along to your students or someone. Particularly if you see somebody being bullied in class, that means they're probably being bullied in the hallway, they're being bullied on the playground. Like, you are the adult in their lives that may look out for them and recognize that harm that's being dealt on them by someone who isn't you outside of that space. So please know that those kind of resources are hopefully available anywhere that you teach. And I think there's kind ways to let folks know that those resources are there for them. Like, there's a lot of text sort of to talk to someone if somebody has really dark thoughts, and that can, younger folks, especially like middle school and high school kids, tend to find those really valuable when they're going through a lot in regards to bullying.
You brought up an important strategy, which is as people start teaching at a school, you should be able to talk to your principal or the counselor that's there for a list of those resources so that you're proactive to have them before it actually happens. So most schools know where those resources are, you just have to ask. So thanks, Aisha, for bringing that up. I'll turn over to Do you want to say the question one more time, Mia?
Sure. The resources and tools that you all might know of to help educate us, to refer to share with our students, and that could be of all range of topics. If you're talking about heritage or mental health or historical events, if you're talking about culture and identity, anything that's highlighted from all of you that's helped any of you, that you've seen help somebody else.
If you're actually interested in the Japanese American experience during World War II, there's the Japanese American National Museum that is located in Los Angeles, downtown LA. And they have a website that would be very helpful in providing lesson plans if you wanted to do a lesson. I know my wife has picked up some information from them before.
So Glenn, do you want to talk about visiting that museum in the last couple of months and what went on there?
I'm not sure which experience you're talking about, but I was actually at the museum a few weeks ago, and they had a special exhibit about religion in the camps. And as we were walking through that special exhibit that is since finished, there's a whole section of Bibles. And as I was walking through with my niece said, "Hey, what was Auntie Marion's maiden name?" And as it turns out, my aunt's Bible was in the exhibit with her name in there. And it was pretty crazy. So I'm going, well, wonder when she got that Bible. And it said that it was delivered to her in Arcadia, California. So that I put the dots, connected the dots, and Arcadia is where Santa Anita Racetrack is. And that was the site where my aunt and my father's family initially went when they were removed from their homes. They were sent to the Santa Anita Racetrack and actually lived in the horse stalls there. And that's one of the memories my father relayed on to us, that no matter how hard you scrubbed the walls, it still smelled like a horse stall. So I know sometimes you have memories that smells or sounds trigger things, and that for my father, it was the smell of a horse stall that triggered a lot of those memories for him. Was that the one you're talking about, Rob?
The let's see, stamping the book, or what was it?
Yes. So there's been a project where they have a book of names, and this is all 120,000 people that were in the various camps. And so this book is about 6 inches thick and about 10 by 12 in size. And it's a list of names of all the people that are in the camp. So you could make an appointment and go and put a little stamp next to the name of someone that you knew. So we were able to go in and stamp this book, and stamped my father's name, my mother's name, my grandparents' names. And a tremendously moving experience for me to see their names in this book, because it's a recognition of the experience that they went through. Such a very simple thing, but to see their names in block letters, my mother, my father, my grandparents on both sides, my aunts and uncles, we were able to put little dots next to their name just to recognize the experience that they went through. So
Thanks,
you got
Glenn.
me again, Rob. You got me talking about something that I wasn't expecting. I wasn't able to prepare for that one, so you caught me again. I'm notorious for losing it in these discussions.
As everybody sees, and this happens every time we do this, right? There's certain parts that are still emotional because of that experience in the United States to your parents.
Yeah.
And all of us who are Americans, we did it, and it just shows how emotional it is.
Yeah. So talking about those wounds that you can open up, Mia, you were talking about, you don't know what wounds you might be opening up. Rob just caught me with a wound that it's still healing, to think about what my parents went through, what my grandparents went through, how they persevered, and how they were able to provide a life for me and my brother and sister and my cousins, to the point where we could be, I would say overall we've been pretty successful. But what they had to endure during the prime years of their lives, thinking about my grandparents, those were they'd started businesses. They lost their businesses as they're sent off to camps. My parents were in school. They had to leave their schools. My dad was in college. My mother was in high school. They had to leave their schools and go get moved away. So yeah, that's a open wound for me that I guess is still healing, because Rob got me again, made me talk about something I wasn't ready to talk about. So
Sorry, Glenn.
thank you, Rob.
Blanca, you've got some other resources you put in the chat?
Yes, I'm just adding them in there. You should maybe just click on them, bookmark them. There's a lot of great tools, and some have K-12, others are for a little bit older, but I think most of them should have something for K5, K6.
Great. I'll turn it over to my colleague, Casey Mastrup, and let you finish out the panel.
All right. Well, I just want to thank you so much. I know for many other people in this room, this is the first time I've been able to hear from you all, and it's just so much to process and take on. I just want to thank you for sharing your space, your hearts, your stories with all of us here. And so our final question is, and I think you've all touched on this in different ways, but to kind of put that in there for you all, what are some of your final recommendations about teaching history and cultures at the elementary level? And again, I just want to recognize that you've already mentioned a couple different ways, but I just was hoping there's those one parting words to leave us with.
Final thoughts, Glenn, Aisha, Blanca.
I'll just repeat what I said before. Don't forget about the retirees. There are people who are out there who are willing to come and be part of your classroom and would be honored to do that. So don't forget about us old guys. We still have something to contribute.
I think what I would share is what I said earlier is be willing to be vulnerable with your students, make those connections early, build community with your students, reach out to the parents the first time that your students do something right, so that the first communication they get from you is hearing about something wonderful that their student did. And that tends to really open the door for, better relationships with the parents and the caregivers, and also with the students, because they leave with the feeling, or they'll hear about it and they'll know that you care. And that's so important. So I would say that would be those are my last words.
Well, I think, as the token white girl on the panel, no, I'm actually I'm Scottish, and I know whoever gets to say that, never. I'm, my family is half Scottish and I am Hispanic, but they tried really hard to really white mainstream. And when we have these points of privilege in our life, when it's safe to speak out, when it's safe for you to be a teacher that pushes an envelope and collects all of your other teachers together, and if it's safe for you to wear a rainbow pin and make that kid with a gay parent feel welcome, to have that It's Ramadan, Curious George book in your library, all of those things are making somebody feel seen and heard. And I do hope that as you go out into the world and you teach, that you don't leave out the things that they left out before, right? We don't have to teach that these missions were these happy-go-lucky places when they weren't. That's not what happened there, right? You're going to find a lot of stories that we were told in ways that really, when I found out the truth, were really upsetting to me. And 20 years later, I'm still super salty that somebody ever presented the South or slavery as though, the Civil War, as though it weren't about owning people. and tried to make excuses for that. You as a teacher get to present a lot of things, and hopefully you do so with this real international perspective that makes everyone feel included, that talks about Aztecs being leaders in math, and you talks about Ibn Sina not whitewashing his name to Avicenna, this great Arab explorer and artist. Like, tell all of the stories, or a little bit, of people all around the world, so that we don't keep perpetuating those same myths that we were taught, like that Columbus found America. So I'm really, really upset about that. But I hope that you all will go out and make a difference in the way that you include people and teach history, and make all of your students feel welcome in class. Thank you, Rob, for making us feel welcome here and letting me stand on my little opinionated soapbox.
Yeah, hey, Casey, so I was thinking as a follow-up here that we could invite our students to all type in the chat box something, 2 to 3 words perhaps, that they'll take away from this. Or is there another version of that you
I think that sounds great.
All right, so everybody type it in first, and then we'll all hit enter at the same time. So 1, 2, or 3 words of what you're taking away from this, and then I'll say go, and that'll be our thanks to Glenn, Blanca, and Aisha. Sorry, Tyler couldn't join us. He's too busy being the mayor of Monterey.
We're so happy for him. It's been awesome seeing all the progress he's making. Tyler's my hero too. I love everyone on this panel.
I know, he's our buddy.
Yeah. All right, 1, 2, 3. Everybody hit enter so everybody can see what you're taking away. That's awesome. All right, we for sure will save this chat somehow and share it back with all of you, because this chat has been a lot more interesting this time around than the past ones. Any other final words, Casey, before we close out?
No, but just thank you so much. I look forward to just building more relationships with you all. I feel so grateful that Rob was able to make this connection. So thank you.
Great.
I wish you all the best in your careers. Good luck, everyone.
All right. Bye, Glenn, Aisha, and Blanca. We'll say goodbye to you. And for the rest of us, my clock says 5:55. So let's reconvene at 6. Casey, does that sound all right? 15 minutes, about 6:10?
I think that sounds great.
All right. See you all at 6:10. Go take your breaks, and then we'll do a debrief after this.
Rob, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Oh, good. Thank you.